Welcome to the Lila Life Show. I'm your host, Linda Andrews, and I'm so excited for our episode today. I have Dr. Gabrielle Pelicci, a PhD speaker at the amazing Wonderland Conference down in Miami. If you haven't had a chance to go, I highly recommend it. And author of All This Healing is Killing Me. And for those of you on the healing journey, you know probably what that means. And those of you that are just dipping your toe in, don't be intimidated. I have a sense that Dr. Gabby will break this down for us today. Welcome, Dr. Gabby, to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
We're gonna.
It's so funny that you introduced the book like that, because people have been interviewing me about the book and they're like, so, the title, where did you get it and what does it mean? And I was like, if you understand the title, the book is for you. Like, that's it. That's all I have to say. It's like something that people either burst out laughing when I say the name of the book, and then I'm like, I know who you are, or else people just kind of like tilt their head. It's such a differentiator in conversation. Yeah.
You probably know pretty quickly where someone's at.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
There's this formula that through my own journey I've created. I don't think it's novel, but it's heal, be, create. And that may resonate deeply for you. And I have a sense that each of those words, there's a story or two that you may want to share. But if you want to start with a little bit of your origin story, and then we can dive into this heal, be, and create, and how that's impacted you on your journey.
Yeah, the origin is a very winding trail, and I wrote, 80,000 words about it for people that want to take a deep dive. The book is a memoir. Where I am currently sitting is preparing for the Wonderland Conference that's coming up here in 2 weeks in Miami. I'll be doing book signings. I'll be sitting on a panel about trauma, which has become a lot of my life work, trauma recovery. I didn't intentionally set out that way. I wanted to be like a ballet dancer and something else, like it wasn't like, I think I'll do trauma work in the world, but I had a series of unfortunate events, and I lost my mom when I was young, and then she became a spiritual guide for me. And then I was on the path of the woman healer, and I did my dissertation research about women healers. I traveled to many different countries and interviewed many different women, started teaching, and then eventually ended up during the pandemic living with some medicine women. One was in New Mexico. I was working with peyote, and then one was in Guatemala. I was working with psilocybin, and I just magically ended up working with plants. And last year at the Wonderland Conference, a year ago from now, I met the Third Wave community and got hired to work in that community. And that was the gateway really to being full-time in the psychedelics community. And so now I'm just like supporting a lot of people on their own journey and speaking and writing about how much the plants have changed my life. Because I think it's the next medicine. I think it's an emerging medicine. It's ancient, it's like thousands of years old, but I think it's the next emerging medicine for everybody.
And my understanding of your background is your family, or your dad specifically, had more of a traditional background in medicine. For you and your trauma understanding and trauma healing, and then to embark into the plant medicine space, were you having any of your own stigmas to rub up against? How was that? How was unpacking that for you and what you were raised in, and coming up against some of those paradigms?
Yeah, my dad was a neurologist and psychiatrist, and we were medicated from the day that we were born. Like anytime we like coughed or sneezed or cried, we were given medicine. And it was almost religious. It was almost like a dogma, it was like beyond even medicine. And that was my paradigm for most of my life.
Mm.
And I was very averse to psychedelic medicine because there was a lot of addiction and mental illness in my family. And the only stories that I knew were the ones where you would go crazy if you tried drugs and it would fry your brain. And that was my education. And so I never did anything. I was like so nerdy and like straight A student and like braces and glasses and like bad perms and just like didn't do anything. I was so good. It wasn't even an option to me. But as I accumulated more of my own symptoms around my own traumatic experiences, Western medicine just didn't work. I think Western medicine is really good for acute care, but for chronic pain and mental illness, it just doesn't work. Like, it just doesn't work. So I had to find other solutions because I was suffering really badly. And that's how I ended up in all the holistic health and wellness modalities, all the yoga and the meditation and the silent retreats and the cold plunges and the saunas and the acupuncture and the EMDR. And that, like, that's how I ended up all the things. And if you told me 10 years ago that I would be microdosing on mushrooms or going to ayahuasca ceremony, I would have said there's no way that that would ever happen, because it just didn't feel in alignment. It didn't feel safe. Didn't feel safe.
Mm-hmm.
And then everything changed. I'm writing a book about that now. It'll be finished at the end of the year, about how it changed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the women that I work with and how it became part of my life. When you're ready, you're ready. I think, like, when it's time, they call you in, and now it's about a relationship, right? It's about having a relationship with the mushrooms or the vines or the plants or the cactus. It's like, it's about a relationship. It to me, the plants, the mind altering plants, they're not even in the same category as like a pharmaceutical. It's like night and day different for me, because there's sentience in plants. And so for me, it's like my intelligence and your intelligence coming together to solve a problem together. Let's solve a problem together. And it's medicinal, but to me, it's not even in the same category of like synthetic substances. It's completely different.
I love that distinction. And, I know, like, for instance, ketamine, and there's many synthetics. And it seems like the deeper that this conversation around psychedelics go, probably the more and more synthetics that will come to market, just the nature of the pharmaceuticals. I haven't heard that distinction so simply put, of like the sentience and the not. And like, that just feels so clear to me. And there's power in the synthetics,
Yes.
for whatever reason, artificial also and that feels funny timing with AI, like even a year ago versus now, artificial intelligence on such a huge upswing. I'm not here to say bad or good. There's a role, there's a tool. A friend of mine has a ketamine clinic. Obviously, that's been what's moving forth the quickest, it seems, legally, right? So there's a role and a place for it, but that distinction of the nature piece and the role of nature, and like us with one with nature, the union with nature, the reverence with nature as nature, creating a bigger piece of the pie in society for that it's like an energetic of that. How do we cultivate more of that? I guess the question comes to sacred and reverence as part of nature.
Yeah, I think you have to opt into that, right? So one of the jobs I had during the pandemic is I was doing telemedicine health coaching through a company, and I was talking to, I don't know, 70 or 100 patients, right? And they were struggling with everything, diabetes, and they were overweight, and they were on 6 different medications, and they were drinking Diet Coke all day long, blah, 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 right? And are they going to opt into some nature ceremony, pagan ritual, cacao, something like that's not okay. We're different places, different worlds, different paradigms. So I think part of the place where I sit and have sat for a long time, I'm always on the panel with the shamans. Like, I'm always the PhD lady on the panel with the shamans and trying to translate the conversation as best I can between two groups. And I did this also when I was teaching yoga. Like, I would talk about yoga, how it affects your nervous system or your digestive system or your endocrine system. I would try as much as I could to speak the language of the people that I was serving so that they could have a bridge between both. And stepping into sacred relationship with nature, you can have invitations there. You can plant seeds there. You can watch documentaries about it. Maybe you have a friend that's going, but I wouldn't recruit anybody any more than I would recruit them to being, in some kind of religion or something like that. It's just the direction that my path has taken. My relationship with nature has become more and more sacred and more reverent over time. That being said, also, you mentioned like the ketamine clinics being a good gateway for people. It's accessible, it's more mainstream, it's moving a lot faster. there's real value in that, because these people that I was talking to during the pandemic that are suicidally depressed or
Mhm.
sitting home drinking a bottle of wine, ketamine being so accessible and so easy, they can have home treatments, we can coach virtually. That's going to save a lot of people. We know that it is effective. That's going to save a lot of people, and not all 8 billion people on the planet are going to go sit in a ceremony in Peru, right?
Mhm.
So this is the place where I've always sat as a professor of integrative medicine, as a speaker on these panels. It's like this is a both and
Mhm.
conversation. This is a modern and ancient, this is a technology and nature. This is a both and conversation, because that's who we are. We can't polarize this the way that we do.
So much, so much, maybe everything is the both and.
Yeah,
For you, with you were raised Catholic, was that
indeed.
like a deprogramming process? What was your healing journey like in your relationship with religion? What was that unfolding process like for you? If you're still in it, like, how do you look at that?
Yeah. I always had a very mystical relationship to spirit. I always felt like I was talking to spirit, either out loud or in my mind. I always had goosebumps in the church when they would do chanting and burn the incense. And I always took the ritual very seriously. And I feel like that was my relationship with grace, and that was my relationship with divinity. And what has changed over time, kind of deprogramming from like some of the like patriarchal nonsense, blah, blah, but mostly just trying on different versions of the sacred. I've done all the Tibetan empowerments. I've taken bodhisattva vows. I've prayed in Gurdwara and sat with Sikhs, learning about their language and learning about their stories. I've been to sacred sites all over the world. I've traveled through India and Tibet and China, and I've been in shamanic journeys with all different kinds of shamans from South America. It's still like, for me, the divinity is the thread that runs through everything. And I feel like I access it in so many different ways, and I enjoy accessing it in so many different ways, in the same way that you don't want to eat the same meal every day. Like praying to a goddess, like doing Tara chants in the Tibetan tradition, is just as satisfying to me as saying Hail Marys, is just as satisfying to me as doing yoga asanas and going into my shavasana bliss, right? These are all access points. I think the biggest thing that's changed over time is that now I realize that all of it is inside of me, or that there is
Mhm.
this like, I am divine, divine, I am, that sort of non duality, confusing mental place to hang out has become much more tangible to me. Whereas before, it was much more of a pursuit, a linear pursuit. Like I
Mhm.
had to achieve certain things and accomplish certain things and perfect certain poses. And now I feel like a wholeness of an embodiment, I guess is a good word, an embodiment of divinity that I didn't feel before.
And with that divinity and the embodiment, I'm imagining with the plant medicine, it could have helped you access that even deeper.
100%. Yeah, because you're ingesting it. It becomes part of you. I can feel, even though I'm not on shrooms right now and I'm not, I'm sober now, but I can feel them inside of me in the same way that you you can feel love for your partner even when you're not in the physical space with your partner. There still feels like there's some kind of exchange that's happening even when you're not in direct physical presence. And I have that relationship with the medicines inside of me, that there's a relationship there. I can feel them pinging me sometimes, like, you need to do a ceremony or
Mm.
something, like in the same way that you get that sixth sense, I need to call my mom or I need to call my sister. It's relational, which is what we've known in indigenous cultures for centuries. But having this experience now at this time, I think it's extraordinary. I think it's a really extraordinary privilege to be able to feel this at this time.
Yeah, the time that we're living in and the role of division feels, at least for me, the most intense it's ever felt. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like palpable, I would say daily. And I am curious about the way that this inner healing can translate in interrelated connection. But it feels like on some days we have a lot of work to do. What do you see the path of, like, I want to aim it as ultimate harmony? Is that possible? Could that exist? What can the role of plant medicine be in that, if any?
I really value contrast as well. I keep going back to this both and I don't mean it as a cop out, but the contrast, the challenge, the conflict, the polarities, all of that is fertile ground for creativity. It's
Mm-hmm.
fertile ground for coming up with solutions, innovation, things you haven't thought of before.
Mm-hmm.
It's fertile ground for hard conversations. It's fertile ground for clearing out crap that like your ancestors weren't able to clear out in their lifetime. Like there's so much of that dark, bad, shadow, however you want to label, that to me is just become more and more beautiful over time. Does that mean that I like to be uncomfortable? No, I don't want to suffer. I don't want to be in pain.
Mm-hmm.
But I've come into relationship with a lot of those things, again, more in reverence, more in like, oh, okay, I see you. I see you. You are here. What do you want me to do? Tell me what you want me to do. You want me to practice more patience? You want me to practice more compassion? Where are we going? Tell me where we're going. It's just like, it's like small shifts, and the notion of something wrong is happening or there's something to blame, it's less sticky than it was before. It used to be very sticky. I could stay in righteousness. I could stay in blame. I could stay in shame. I could stay in those places longer. And now they're not as sticky for me as they used to be.
That makes a lot of sense. I feel like right now there's a lot of sense making of like, whoa, why is this happening? People trying to contextualize with an understanding of history, making sense. Ultimately, it feels with the desire to go forward. Like, I have to believe that as part of humanity, we want to go forward. And yet there feels like a lot of messiness in the going forward part. And I like the both and, like, I feel sufficient. I'm also an improv nerd, so
I love improv. Yes,
there's actually an improv class this weekend if you happen to be free Saturday.
Oh, it's so great. It's like, yes, my legs are falling out. What should I do now? Yeah. Oh, that's so great. I love that you're bringing improv into the conversation. I love that you're laughing. I love, a lot of times people interview me about my book and they're like, you're so happy. I'm like, yes, life is fun. Life is funny. Life is playful. Like, let's add and infuse that energy, because that also facilitates all of these things that we're talking about. We're just too serious all the time, in my personal opinion. Like, I'm the biggest nerd. Like I said, like, I love to be silly. I'll try to get my clients laughing. I'll say things that are weird and inappropriate because it breaks those patterns, you know? I love that you mentioned improv. It's awesome.
It's really funny at this point in my life. When I leave an improv class, I am in such an elevated joy space that I'm a pretty happy person most of the time, but it's like a whole new kind of anchor point that I'm just like, whoa. And it feels like it makes all of me drop and then just show up as fully me and explore whatever dimension needs to be explored in that moment. And yeah, there's like some medicine. I don't know all the neurochemical that's going on, but I have to imagine that there's something almost psychedelic and transcendental going on like a neurochemical standpoint because of how I feel when I
Of
walk out.
course. Of course. That's the perfect explanation of it. It's trippy, it's fun, it's elevating, it's mood elevating, it's stress relieving, it's all of those things. I
And
highly recommend it.
it's a really unique group. You know, I go in there and it couldn't be a more diverse group, at least the improv classes I've attended, and they all seem to have that common thread where, you know, you think of division and political stance and religion and all these things, and it's like, no, it's an extremely safe space and we're creating, and now we go forth. And then I'm imagining each of us going on in our life carrying whatever that energetic is. And there's so many components of that there's other ways to get it, but it just happens to be a really powerful hour and a half.
Yeah. And we've been culturally, socially in this phase of like abstinence and puritanism and something and sex is bad, drugs, and, you know, like, come on, come on. like, like, come on. I think re-engaging in pleasure, one of the books I read this year was called Pleasure Activism, re-engaging with pleasure just for the sake of having pleasure. Like, please,
Mm-hmm.
yes, add this back into your life. If it's not there, schedule it until it becomes a habit and you're just doing it and you're just feeling pleasure. We need to restore those things, which is another thing I say when people ask me about the book. All this healing is killing me. I'm like, this is also a warning. Don't do this all the time. Don't go to counseling 7 days a
Mm-hmm.
week. You
Mm-hmm.
have to compartmentalize. There has to be improv classes and paddleboarding and having sex and eating good food. There has to be this as well in your life. You need that balance of both.
Yeah, like in your if you think back, and I know your deeper moments of despair brought you to near death, like in those deepest moments of despair, now you may be able to reflect and see like the joy, but what were some of those access points in those moments that could get you out of the deep despair into hope, into purpose? Can you identify that?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, one of them is prayer. I'm an
Mhm.
obsessive prayer. Like, I pray all the time about everything, like before I get in the car and like before I come on a podcast. Like I pray all the time. And my form of prayer is like, please help me. Can someone please help me? Like I don't know what I'm doing. So someone please help me. So like very
You're on the
humble
request
prayers.
line.
That's it. So tons of prayer, tons of getting outside. I always feel safer outside than inside. So
Mhm.
whenever I'm in my worst, like, oh my God, I'm grieving, I'm angry, whatever, if I just leave whatever physical environment that I'm in, like indoors, and I go outside, it's so much harder to be suicidal when you're like on a hike.
Mhm.
Because, like, just the fact that you're outside is
Mhm.
somehow sustaining, nourishing, nurturing, support. Like, it just does. And so, for a long time, I would just spend 20 out of 24 hours outside, as much time outside
Wow.
as
Yeah.
possible, because that's just like critical for me if I'm in like a bad space mentally. And then there's like support system. One of the findings of my dissertation research was that we need a support system. It's critical. We have plenty of empirical research that shows this. And I had heard one person say it, and I really liked this. A lot of us in like our psychology 101 classes learn that Maslow hierarchy of needs, where it's like first you need food, then you need shelter, then you need belonging, then and I heard someone say, actually, no, what you need is belonging first, because
Mm.
you can take a human and you can give them a beautiful house and food to eat and all the things. And if they don't have belonging, they're going to have addiction. They're going to have mental illness. They're going to be suicidal. I think belonging is more essential. Support is more essential than food and water, just for
Mhm.
our survival. I think we're social beings. And I think cultivating a good support system is critical to survival.
With the tech enablement of 2023 and forward, there's a lot of ways that that can breed connectivity, but it feels like the loneliness epidemic or pandemic and the isolation is also more easily accessible than ever. How do we come to a understanding of to use tech and still save that connectedness and that community and that belongingness? Because it's like you could have what 10,000, million, multi-million connection and never have felt so lonely ever. And it almost feels like a distortion of values. I could talk about this forever. It feels really important.
Amen. I totally agree. I think I exist on a spectrum. I kind of slide back and forth from one side to the other. My favorite use of technology as a tool to leverage stuff in real life. Like you and I, we're connected on this. And then you're like, I live in your town. And I'm like, you live in my town. You're like, come to my garden. And I'm like, yes, I want to come to your garden. So, like, that's my favorite example of how tech has just, oh my God, catapulted me into the most phenomenal real life situations, connections, relationships, just joy. So much joy and blessings. And then I slide like everybody else down the other one, where I start to get fatigued and I start to get burned out and I spend too much time online and I can't motivate myself to go out into the real world. And I just kind of like, until I go, oh my God, look what you're doing. And then I give myself a digital detox. I forbid myself to touch devices for a period of time until almost until like the serotonin and the dopamine come back on. I feel like I actually get depleted to the point where I don't even know that I'm overdosing on devices. I don't even, I'm like, and then I'm like, oh, I'm overdosing. And then I deliberately detox myself. So I
Mhm.
slide back and forth. There's so many tools that I love. There's so much tech that I love. I'm also someone who could survive if it all went away. If all of this went away tonight and we woke up tomorrow and there was no more tech, I would be fine. I would be happy. It's not essential to my well-being. And I don't think that's true for everybody. I think some people would jump off a building if that
Mhm.
happened tomorrow. I don't think, and I think that's when you're in really dangerous territory.
Mhm.
That's pretty scary.
When you were healing, I mean, we're healing, right? Are healing, we're healing. It feels like it's continuous for all of us, not to speak for you, but how did understanding your nervous system, like when were you first understanding the importance of that on your healing journey? And I want to talk about the healing killing you, but I want to start with like the nervous
Yeah,
system
yeah. I
piece.
think the first time anyone said anything to me was when I was in my yoga teacher training in Los
Mhm.
Angeles in 2004. One of my yoga teachers was like, "Oh, your nervous system is completely destroyed." And I was like, first of all, like, how can you see my nervous system? And like, how do I see my nervous system? And like, how do you know that? And then they had like all these recipes for how to fix my nervous system. No one had ever spoken that language to me before. I don't think anyone in 2004 was speaking that language, really. It was very
Mhm.
rare to hear that language, like, oh, it's your nervous system. Because my verbalization of my own condition, I would have said, like, I'm anxious or I'm depressed or I'm too, I'm manic, I'm hyper, I'm like, I had a different language and it was a very psychotherapeutic language because it was the language that I understood how to speak about myself. But after yoga pointed me towards my nervous system, then I became obsessed. So I've been obsessed with nervous system recovery for the last 20 years. And every time I interact with something, whether it's a physical substance or a biohacking practice or whatever it is,
Mhm.
I'm really curious about how it's going to affect my nervous system, and I'm always paying attention to it deeply. And I would say I have like one of the best nervous systems ever now because I've been obsessed with it for so long. It's just when I make choices based on how it's going to affect my nervous system, everything just unfolds in the best possible way. If that's my compass, and this is going to be confusing for a lot of people who are listening. If you don't speak this language and you're not in touch with how your nervous system works, this is going to be super confusing to the listeners until you kind of wrap your head around it.
What would you recommend as like a starting relationship for a listener that feels confused and you're like, what are you talking about? To start to cultivate that intimacy and relationship with their nervous system.
Ideally, I would point you to like some kind of self-assessment. I'm not aware of anything like this that exists, but
Mhm.
like ideally, I would point you towards a self-assessment, and it would say something like, "Do you get startled really easily?
Mhm.
Do you get emotionally triggered really easily? Do you do you find that you hold a lot of tension in your neck and your shoulders? Do you feel crunched up? Do you grind your teeth a lot? Um do you feel frazzled, burnt out, exhausted easily? Like I would point towards symptoms that I think people could relate to
Mhm.
when your nervous system is deregulated, overstimulated, um, in need of repair. When it's
Mhm.
like when your car is clanking and the flash engine light is coming on and you're like, oh my God, what's wrong with the car? Like those are the type of symptoms that I would point people towards. And then I would invite them to try tested and true nervous system regulation techniques, whether it's an EMDR or a cold plunge or some different kinds of body work and energy work that target the autonomous nervous system. Like I would point them towards things and I would say, try this protocol for a month or two
Mhm.
and notice if you're less jumpy, if you're less startled, if you're falling asleep easier, if you're waking up more energy, like notice shifts and track those. And it's an experience, I think, more than it is something that I could I just don't see any good resources on this, to be honest with you. I've cobbled together my own resources, over
Mm-hmm.
decades of learning.
Mm-hmm.
Body keeps the score is pretty
Yeah.
good, but I don't think it's comprehensive.
And a
Um,
bit dense to dive right into
yeah,
for like the first.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm
And Lila,
feeling, go ahead.
go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, like, I would love to see Dr. Gabby's like nervous system assessment checklist or something on your website, maybe a
Yeah.
future.
It's a good idea. It's a good idea. Somebody needs to simplify it in a way that most people can understand. I think it would also contribute to more interest and use in some of the psychedelics because there's such a direct correlation. And sometimes when I sit with people for an hour or two and have this conversation, you can kind of see the light bulbs going off and they're like,
Mhm.
oh, that makes sense. So,
The tech side of that, like for me personally, I can feel so strung out from the tech. And that feels like my worst nervous system moments. Like I'm like, whoa, I feel just fried. I'm like, what just
yes,
happened to me? And I'm like, all
yes.
right, in some, religious traditions, it's like the Sabbath is actually tech free. And I'm like, what does that do for your nervous system in 2023 to take a day off a week, tech free? And social media is one thing, but like just tech is another. It's not just I'm pretty good at being off social, but then it's all the other tech that's always around. There's this ratio I try to pay attention to. It's the consumption versus creation ratio. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like the overconsumption of it could be food, tech, really anything. And then I'm like, whoa, if I'm consuming, I'm likely not creating. Where's my ratio? But it may be oversimplifying.
No, I have a conspiracy theory that that's not accidental. I think it's not accidental the amount of stimulation that's being sent our way because when we have the opportunity to be creative, we come up with all kinds of disruptive stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's an accident that you feel that way and you use perfect vocabulary. You're saying things like I feel fried or I feel strung out, right? You were using the vocabulary of the nervous system. So I think intuitively, like you're just hitting the nail on the head. Yeah.
So tell me how healing can be killing me. I'm
I
dying to
mean, okay,
know.
so
Pun
okay, so
intended.
so I mean, one of the things I wanted to highlight with the title was the fact that there is somewhat of a stigma around healing, especially the softer healing modalities, that it's fluffy, it's spa days, it's,
Mm.
you know, luxurious. And one of the things I wanted to point to was that it's really warrior work to go down this path. If you're going like, bravo to any listeners who
Mhm.
are in psychotherapy, who are in, going to their chiropractic sessions and their ayahuasca retreats, and like, congratulations. And we are proud of you. Like, this is hard work. All of it is really hard work. And there's going to be times on the journey where you don't think you can survive the healing work. You're in some journey and you're like, oh, I'm going to die. Today's the day I die. Like, and you're going to believe in every cell of your being, today's the day I die. Like, yeah. And obviously you're not going to be laughing about it. Like, you can laugh about it in retrospect,
Later,
but
yeah.
yeah, it's going to be that hard. It's going to be that hard. And I think just acknowledging it and celebrating people that are doing it is an important part of the conversation.
Yeah, it's like that brink and then it eases off. I'm wondering too in those moments of that depth of the feeling if like that is the unlock. Like you had to just even feel that, like get that close to the killing you part because that's what unlocks. You talk about space. Like that's what makes room, that what slaws it off, that is the detox, is like that depth of the feeling that you weren't letting yourself feel.
Yeah. And so much of it is that you're just terrified of the feeling
Mm.
because feelings are terrifying. just so total feelings, just feelings are terrifying. Feeling your grief, feeling your rage, like feelings are terrifying. So even if you just have the courage to feel your feelings, which I would say probably 80% of the world is not even doing, even if you just have the courage to feel your feelings, you're ahead of the curve because they're really scary. It's so weird that we have so many things happening
all the
inside of us
time.
all the time that are paralyzing. You know, it's crazy. So even if you're just feeling your feelings, like gold star.
Did you have blame, shame, guilt come up for you in the healing journey? And how did you, if so, deal with those?
No, everything was perfectly easy for me. Everything was perfectly
I
easy.
think like I don't know if it's just at the beginning when especially the blame, but like that those three things, blame, shame, guilt, I find those puzzling for people to make sense of getting out of those three. Like it's easy to get stuck in those three. If you have any insights to
I mean, I
listeners.
was like, it took me till I was in my 40s, I think, to even acknowledge that I had any shame. These were I had a lot of blind spots. I
Mm-hmm.
had a lot of blind spots because I'm good at life. Like, I get good grades, I get good jobs, I look cute most days. Like, I can life myself through life.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just had a lot of blind spots, and I had to get really kind of bullied by the universe many times to see things I didn't want to see. And I learned early on, I think it was probably in the Buddhist path and stuff, that anything that I thought that I was seeing was really just a reflection of myself,
Mm-hmm.
which I resisted and refused to believe. But the seed was planted. And so I would always have this voice in my mind when I would start to be like, well, that person's an asshole. And well, that, like, I would always have this thing be like, no, you're the asshole. And I'd be like, what do you mean? Like, what do you mean? It's not me. This isn't about me. And so gradually over time, confronted my own guilt, shame, grief, blah, blah. Gradually over time, confronted them. And really, there's such a tenderness under them. There's such a sweet, vulnerable tenderness at the base when you get through all of that stuff. And then there's just this like little thing inside of you that's just like has been waiting for you for your whole life to just come and pick it up and be like, no, everything is going to be okay, right? So it's such a adventure, but I feel like I always end up in a place of surprise and delight and finding things within myself that were completely hidden, and it's beyond anything that I could have imagined when
And
I started out.
pre plant medicine,
Mm-hmm.
you had explored a lot of healing modalities, and then there's maybe your post plant medicine journey. Like, what's that distinction in how your healing journey shifted when you added in plant medicine?
To circle back to the nervous system conversation, I feel like the 20 or so years of work I did leading up to the plant medicine was resilience nervous system work,
Mm-hmm.
right? I feel like if I had done the trips that I did 20 years ago, I think it would have been bad. I think it would have been really, really bad for me. I think intuitively I knew that I needed to wait until I had a certain amount of physical, mental, and emotional stability
Mm-hmm.
to be able to benefit from plant medicine. I think I could have done it okay, like safely,
Mm-hmm.
but I needed a lot of nervous system repair to be able to work with the plants. I think the plants are really, really strong medicine. That's my experience of them. They're
Mm-hmm.
very, very, very strong. They're very powerful. And for me, that the fact that they're coming in my body, my container needs to be strong. My container needs to be clean. My container needs to be well rested and to be able to hold what they have to offer for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were able to take me further into wholeness, but only once I was ready to receive that from them, which for me took a very long time.
That's a great explanation, though. It feels really clear. Um, with the journey, How did your relationship with truth and trust change?
Um, right now, I feel like the most trustworthy participant or ally in my life is nature. It just feels like the thing I can rely on the most.
Mhm.
I mentioned the example of like just being outside, even if I'm not taking any plant medicine, even if I'm just outside, it's the thing that has been the most consistent ally for me throughout my whole life. So I have unwavering, unconditional support with nature and with plants, even so much so that in the times where, and it hasn't happened in a long time, maybe 3 or 4 years, when I would be like so dysregulated that I couldn't feel anything, I would just be yelling at nature, being like, I can't feel it. You're not helping me. Like even in my complete frustration and total breakdown, I had a sense that it was available to me and I just wasn't able to access it somehow. So
Mhm.
I just have unwavering, unconditional support and love and trust with nature. I don't know how that relates to truth so much. I think I don't really like the word truth. I think I've heard it too much in Catholicism and I don't know, religious and political context. And I don't know. For me, I really like the word honesty. One of
Mhm.
the compliments I get a lot on my book is thank you for being so honest. Thank you
Mhm.
for being so honest. And so I think the word honesty feels a lot better for me than the word truth because maybe everything in my book I made up. Like my brain is just as, unreliable as everybody else's, but it feels really honest because it was the most honest that I could be about my experience,
Mhm.
if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. For you, the process, like, did you know you were going to write a book? I had heard you were in iteration one to iteration two. Like, were you always knowing I'm going to be an author?
Yeah, always.
Okay.
Yeah, I wrote a novel in middle school. It was like a sci-fi novel. Yeah, always. I always knew. And I just kept rewriting and rewriting and rewriting this story because it wasn't ready. Similarly to the not being ready for plant medicine, like I just wasn't
Mm.
ready to birth the book. I had to do so much work on myself to birth the book. And now it's easy. My writing is so much easier now than it was before. But yeah, always. I always knew.
Are you a handwriter or a typer?
Both,
Cool.
both. Yeah.
I started to write 2 years ago. I wrote 25 pages after I lost a friend to an overdose, and the dedication is to him. And it's kind of a memoir mixed with teaching. And I wiped myself out. Like I was like, whoa, I'm not ready. But like it came through quick, and then it was like blew me up, and then it was like 2 more years of healing work, and I was just like, oh
Yeah.
my gosh, this was so intense. And behind this bookshelf is 40 journals, and I have another 40 journals at my parents' house, and it's always been a cathartic thing, the writing, but like it's funny to see how it does or doesn't line up to be a book. And I just celebrate you in being able to fully birth that. I mean, especially if knowing from your first sci-fi novel in middle school. What is the symbolism of the photo of the front page of the book?
I wanted it to be ironic. I wanted it to feel ironic. I wanted it to feel like this very kind of classic still life, but they have kind of like a creepy, mysterious vibe. I wanted it to
I
be kind of
think you
ironic
nailed
because
it.
like all the healing books are so feminine. I don't know what word to use. They're just glittery or something. And yeah, I was trying to be really grounded. And I think the writing feels that way for most people. I wanted to be really grounded and somewhat ironic.
Do you remember the book Go or is it Go Ask Alice? Don't ask Alice. I
No,
had
is
the
it good?
weirdest flashback. This book is from the 70s, and it is a pretty disturbing book. Like I read this in the 90s, and it's like this girl's really intense experience as a teenager with like LSD and alcohol, and like she ends up dying, and it's authored by anonymous, and it's kind of a weird book. I hadn't thought about this book forever, And I thought about it today. I'm like, this is so weird. And I don't know if it was almost propaganda from like the war on drugs and that timing, but it was interesting, like seeing your memoir and then remembering this. I think it's Don't Ask Alice or Go Ask Alice. But if you, it's
I'm
very
gonna look it
weird.
up.
Yeah, it's
I'm
very,
gonna
and
look it up.
it's like a girl's half face and like it's very dark. And I was thinking, I'm like, how old was I? Like, I kind of think I was like 13 when I read this book, like
Wow.
a little, I don't know how I got it. And I was reading the Wikipedia and it said like it was supposed to make you not want to do drugs and also give you the thrill of like the girl's decision making. And I was like reflecting, I'm like, I wonder how much this impacted me at that young age. It's a very
Wow.
interesting book. And yeah, I wanted to share that with you because that came on the
Nice.
radar, yeah, today. If you had a wish for each of your readers that are reading the book to walk away, what would your wish be
Yeah,
from
write
after
your
the
own
read?
story.
Write your
Write
own
your own
story.
story. Write your own story. Write your own story. Write your own story. If it's going to be in 40 journals in your house, great. On your blog, great. You're going to publish it, great. Write your own story. I've started supporting other writers and writing their own stories. And there was a guy here yesterday, he spent the day here. I was helping him on his book, and he was like, "Why are you helping me?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" And he's like, "You don't have to be helping me." I was like, "I want people to tell their stories. And if I have some skills, some insight, some expertise that can support other writers, then I want to support other writers, you know? So I think writing is medicine, and I teach
Mhm.
workshops called Writing is Medicine because to me it's an integral part of the integration process, the self-growth process, the learning about yourself, reflecting. To me, it's just as much medicine as all the other chemicals and substances and things that we can take. So if you read my book and it moves something in you, pick up a piece of paper and a pen or your laptop or whatever and write down why you felt moved and write down what it reminded you of and write down your own story. Like allow it to be a catalyst for you to be creative.
I love that. The role of travel for healing. I have my own conspiracy theory about the globe. And like, I don't know when I started studying ley lines, but I just feel like there's a lot of energy that unlocks when you travel different places. I had a particularly unique experience on Mount Shasta once, and I was kind of like, I don't know if altitude really is what we think altitude is. There's something different going on. So I'd love to know from your travels and your healing journey, like your experience, if any of that feels resonant. But I was learning about your story and I'm like, this woman has had a very intimate experience with the ley lines and the Earth's energetic grid. I just know it.
Yes. Yes. Well said. Well said. Someone asked me, like, where are you going? Why do you keep going to all these places? And I feel like Mario in a video game. Like I feel like I was very specifically drawn to certain places where something needed to be unlocked. I felt it.
Mm,
I felt kinesthetic changes, physiological changes, psychological changes. I felt like certain things were activated in certain places that had I just stayed put all that time, I honestly don't believe I would have gotten there. And ironically enough, after people got used to me doing this for like 40 years and they gave up on me ever settling down, 3 months ago, I bought a house. And all those people now are like, what do you mean you bought a house? How could you buy a house? Like, you're the person who doesn't buy a house. And I was like, no, I was like, the universe told me, like, you're done. You're going to stay here. And
wow.
I looked on one of those maps, you know, the maps that have your, what's it called? Astrocartography.
Astrocartography. Yeah.
And I have two lines that crisscross where I live right now.
Oh my
And
gosh.
I was just like, when I'm here in this city, and it's also a city that people are very curious. They're like, this city doesn't match your personality. I was like, well, clearly you don't know me because I feel in perfect alignment in this space. And so 100% yes, 100% yes. There's something strange and magical and wonderful about physical places. Yes, yes.
Well, since you brought up astrocartography, do you have your astrology or human design as tools in your toolkit?
I think I'm a generator.
Okay.
I've never dived into it very much. Um, I think I grew up kind of pre-human design where everybody talked about enneagrams. That was really
Okay.
popular when I was in grad school. So everything we did in grad school was like about your enneagram, and you were doing that because of your enneagram, and you weren't doing it because of your enneagram. And now I feel like it's been replaced with human design.
Uh-huh.
Um, so I think I'm a generator, if I'm not mistaken.
And on the astrology, do you dabble in the astrology beyond astrocartography?
Uh, what's really interesting is that I'm a Leo in Western astrology, but when I was living with the medicine woman, she does Vedic astrology. She doesn't do Western astrology, and I'm a Cancer. And she just kept talking to me as if I were a Cancer. And I was like, this is so interesting. It
Uh,
just felt like a truer version of me on a deeper level. Because Leo, obviously, I'm Leo. I'm flamboyant. I have flamingos for
yeah.
wallpaper. Like, obviously, I'm very Leo. But there was something that was truer about the Vedic astrology for me. So I don't know if that means anything.
Interesting. Yeah. I'm a student. It's just fun and I'm very much in the learning and I've heard of the evolutionary astrology and the Vedic and a lot of different things. It's just fun. My understanding or interpretation is that like if we are living in a simulation, that the stars were like the program and then we could live in our higher or lower expression of that. And so that's what I'm experimenting with these days.
Nice.
And
That sounds fun.
I'm a manifester. I know we're coming to a close. My one question for you is about I think this could be a powerful ending note, but you are only as sick as your secrets. And this is something that is in your book, and I've heard you talk about for people that may be feeling locked by their secrets. I was like, this episode could be called Unlocked. What's going on with the secrets, and why is this so important to unpack your secrets?
Yeah. My secrets were my superpower, and I didn't even know it.
Mm.
Up until I published the book, nobody knew any of the content in the book because
Mm.
I moved really far away from my hometown and I pretended like it never happened. And there was a few people, very few people, maybe a therapist here and there, boyfriend here and there, that knew some pieces, but nobody had ever heard the whole story. And I held it really close to my chest because I was convinced, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that if you knew the things that had happened to me, you would conclude that I was completely unlovable. I was completely unworthy. I was repulsive. I just felt that the contents of my past and the ripple effect of those things made me undesirable in every possible way. I was convinced. I was so convinced. I was so convinced that I was in a total panic the whole time I was writing, publishing, presenting. I had a book party. And the moments at the book party right before like I went up on stage to do the talk and all the things like that, I was hysterical. My sister was holding me by the shoulders. I was hysterical. I was still convinced it had been published, it had been read, and there was like 100 people, and I was still convinced that I was, almost kind of exposing myself in a way that would get me forever canceled from everybody's life for
Mm.
all time. That's how much power there was in my secrets. There were and what's happened by releasing them, there's been this tremendous relief in every
Mm.
possible way. I'm so much more uninhibited. I'm so much more myself. I'm so much more at ease. I'm so much more in a very comfortable receipt of people's love for me. I just like everything that could change about my life has changed in my life as a result of just presenting my secrets to the world and being like, these are my secrets. It's just made everything about my life better. So that's the before and after. The before is you're only sick as your secrets, and the after is like you're only as healthy and free as you're willing to release all of this into the world, to just give it all up. And to me, the give it all up, it's not you in your room by yourself in your journal writing down your secrets. That's not telling secrets. That putting it in your journal is not, that's not the same thing, people. I did that for many years. This is you are telling other people your secrets, humans. You're telling humans your secrets, preferably face to face, where you feel all the horror of telling it to someone and then receiving love in exchange for the like receiving the compassion and the love and the I mean so much admiration I get from people just being like, wow, you're amazing, you know, like I deserve that. I deserve that. I didn't know that I deserved it, but now I know that I deserved it, and it's only by walking across the fire that you get to that place.
Oh, so good. So good. Thank you so much, Dr.
Yeah.
Gabby. This is so fun. I'm curious if there's any closing notes, and I definitely want to direct people to Third Wave, to your website, so we can have that in the link. So final thoughts and anything you may want to say about your work and your work with Third Wave.
So I lead community calls in the Third Wave community that you can join. I also am available to do stuff with people who are working on writing, who are working with medicine. If you're in town for the Wonderland conference, come to my panel. I'm doing a panel about trauma. It's going to be really fun. I'm doing some book signings. I mean, basically just stay in touch. Like I'm someone who loves to hear from people. So even if you just have questions about this conversation, you can schedule free discovery calls on my calendar. The links are on all my social channels. And yeah, I'm really grateful to just to be here, to have this conversation with you. This was so fun and easy. And I can't believe we just talked for an hour. I don't even
The
know.
portal.
The
We'll
portal.
have to maybe there'll be a part 2 one day, but I
I know.
appreciate your time, and it's really fun. And yeah, thanks everybody for tuning in. Connect with Dr. Gabby, follow her journey, get her book. All This Healing is Killing Me. And we'll see you next time on the Lila Life Show.